is Lauren Hollows from NOI Education Services, and we are continuing our training and assessment strategy series. And today we are going to be talking about entry requirements. And of course, as part of that, we're going to be talking about LLN. Under the current standards, I guess learner support was probably one of the areas where this was a little bit unclear. And there has definitely been a lot of debate in relationship to under the old standards, were you required to have an LLN? Now, my personal interpretation, and I know that, others felt similarly to this. I had a big conversation about Andrew Shea at one point. We are in agreement that we do believe that you need to do some sort of LLN on your learners prior to enrollment. And the reason for that is because under the current standards, under 1.2, it says, for the purpose of 1.1, the RTO determines the amount of training they provide to each learner with regard to the existing skills, knowledge, and experience of the learner. Now, my argument would be, if you don't do any sort of assessment, suitability discussion, LLN, something, if you don't have anything like that with the learners beforehand, how do you know the skills, knowledge, and experience of a learner? Okay. Now, obviously, if you're enrolling somebody in a cert in retail, and you've got their cert 3 in retail, okay, then you've got a pretty good idea. But to me, that is effectively, identifying the existing knowledge, skills, and experience of the learner. Like, you're getting a copy of their qualification, and potentially you are even, you're verifying and validating that beforehand. So the new standards, however, are much clearer in relationship to their expectations. So under the new standards, there is an entire section. So basically all of standard 2 is about learner support. And it incorporates kind of the old standard 4, standard 5 marketing sort of stuff into there as well. But there's a lot more in relationship to, having an understanding of the student before you actually bring the student on board. Okay, so again, under standard 2. So standard 2.1 is learners have access to clear and accurate information. That really just is standard 4 all over again. 2.2 basically says learners are advised prior to enrollment about the suitability of the training product for them, taking into account their skills and competencies. So underneath this, it says the RTO demonstrates a system for reviewing the skills and competencies of learners prior to enrollment, including their language literacy and numeracy proficiency and digital literacy as appropriate to the training product. It provides advice based on the review to the learners about the suitability of the training product for them. Now, I've already started to have heated conversations around this with RTOs. It goes then even further to say that the learner's training support needs are identified, and learners are provided with access to necessary training support services to undertake the training and assessment. The RTO demonstrates how it determines training support services to be provided for each learner and makes these available, and how it assesses the effectiveness of the training support services in learners in undertaking the training and assessment. So that's, I think for a lot of people, they feel that this is like a whole bee's nest that's just been thrown on them. And I'm certainly seeing this a lot in the short courses space. Because obviously with a lot of our short courses, so with our first aids, with our high risk tickets, with our white cards, we have learners in for anywhere from 3 to 8 hours. And that's the entire duration of training that we have with them. And there is an argument that why are we required to provide support to these learners over such a short period of time? look, I think that this is a very nuanced space. And I think that the expectation of support services and the extent to which we're going to be providing learners with information depends primarily on two things. One is the duration of the course in which they are enrolling. So there is going to be I feel very confident saying there is going to be less of an expectation for RTOs that are engaging with learners for a period of 3 to 6 hours and are taking $100 to $200, $300 from a learner than an expectation of an RTO that is engaging with a learner for a period of 1, 2, 3, 4 years, and is being paid by the learner, the employer, or the government, anywhere from $3,000 to $32,000 over the lifetime of that learner in relationship to the support services that they're going to be expected to offer. Now, when it comes to identifying the needs of the learner and discussing with the learner the suitability of the course, this is going to be quite different to what we have seen in the past. And I feel probably like a lot of this has actually, I feel like a lot of this is in response to, one, the funded space, and two, in relationship to the CRICOS space. So a lot of these things are going to focus on CRICOS. There's very, very heavy CRICOS regulation happening at the moment. There's a lot of changes happening in that space. And it's acknowledged that there's a lot of issues in those particular areas. If you're bringing students in from overseas who have never lived in Australia before, who are paying anywhere from $10,000 to $20,000 a year to study in Australia, and you are required under the CRICOS standards to provide an orientation, and you're required to provide support services, you need to provide those services. And when you have learners that are coming to you and saying things like, again, I'm just going to go historical here, massive issues with housing, issues with not understanding how to enter into a basic contract when it comes into, accessing housing in Australia, issues not understanding the basic fair work requirements of Australia, and therefore a range of students being exploited in relationship to putting them, working unfair jobs, working unfair hours, not being paid for certain things, being paid under award wages. While this is not directly related to the training, you literally had an obligation within those standards to provide orientations for the students. And instead, an orientation was like this half-hour, person standing in front of a room, regurgitating a bunch of policies. That's not an orientation to the system. Really, realistically, I think that for most CRICOS RTOs, your orientation system probably needs to really stretch, not just for a day, but you need to think about providing information beforehand. You need to think about providing information in those early days. And I'm not just talking about links. I'm talking particularly, and in relation to the new standards for all RTOs, what we need to be thinking about is we need to think about multimodal learning for RTOs. I would strongly suggest, if you're an RTO and you don't have a YouTube page, you should have a YouTube page with, an outline of what your policies are, how students can access that sort of information. Students are very unlikely to read your policies nowadays. They are far more likely to engage in a couple of minute videos, put out a 2-minute video on your complaints policy, put out a 2-minute video on your appeals policy, put out a 2-minute video on how to access learner support, or how to access, find the Fair Work website, things like that. That's going to be far more effective nowadays, and then back that up with obviously all of the policies and procedures and, all of the written materials that you guys already have. But we really do need to be thinking about supporting learners in better and more effective means in this particular day and age. In relationship to LLNs, there is, look, just under the new standards, there's no wiggle room now. The RTO demonstrates a system for reviewing skills and competencies of the learners prior to enrollment, including their language literacy and numeracy proficiency and digital literacy, as appropriate to the training product. Now, I think there is a fair argument to be made that if, for example, you are enrolling people into a diploma of leadership and management, and you are only enrolling them as existing worker trainees, where it's already been determined that they have a minimum of 5 years experience in industry and they have previous qualifications, that could be your assessment system. There would be some argument for that. I think, and from a digital literacy perspective, you could probably pull it off by having them complete the enrollment information online. However, you will have to think about that for each training product that you have. So if you're delivering a wide range of training products, and so some of my RTOs literally deliver such a broad scope of products. So they might have 10 different training packages. They might deliver traineeships, apprenticeships, job seeker programs. They might deliver a wide scope of those. They will need to think about this for all of them. And again, that entry requirements process and the consideration of that will need to be outlined in your training and assessment strategy. So for each of your courses, what is the assessment strategy? How are you assessing digital literacy, right? If you're not delivering the course online, if you're not delivering the assessments online, if everything's in hard copy, okay, then that's fine. The level of digital literacy that they're going to need is going to be relatively low. If you're delivering a Cert 4 in business online, then the level of digital literacy that you're going to expect from those learners is going to be sufficiently higher. So for each of the courses that you have, what is the level of digital literacy required, and how are you going to assess it prior to enrollment? And then once you've made an assessment, how are you going to feed that information back to the student in relation to the suitability of the course for them? And if the student isn't suitable for the course, how are you going to advise them of that? What options are you going to give them in relationship to learner support? And how are you going to document that? So going back to short courses, if you have a learner that fails the LLN, that indicates that they're not suitable for the course, how are you going to communicate that to them? What options are you going to give them? And if they choose to continue to proceed with the course with all of the information, I would make an argument that's probably fine. However, you need to have a very clear process for documenting that. And you need to make sure that that evidence is retained, and you need to make sure that the learner is fully informed in that process. I do apologize for the change in coloring, guys. It's like sunny one moment and then not the next. So I can see that the screen is going from to two different shades. So I do apologize if that's messing with anyone. But yeah, as I said, it effectively boils down to you having a process for that. I would incorporate a high-level overview of that in the TAS, and then that would then have to filter out into your enrollment process and your student support process. So into both of those things, potentially even into like your marketing as well. I would probably be looking at having kind of a shortened blurb in the marketing for that for all of your courses. And having a very strong policy if you're going to choose to allow learners to enroll in courses where you have advised them that it's potentially not suitable, and be very clear on the support services that you will and will not provide, and if there's any costs associated with that as well. If you're doing any of that through any sort of government funding, you will need to cross-check that with the government funding rules as well, because it's definitely going to be a limiting factor. It's going to be a cost factor when it comes to this sort of process. So again, guys, I'll link to the standards below. If you have any questions in and around this, by all means, please feel free to reach out. Feel free to disagree, but please do so respectfully. Otherwise, have a wonderful day. Thank you very much for listening. As per usual, I am Lauren Hollows for NOI Education Services.